Let's take a look at the audit of outsourcing agreements. If we're going to look at an outsourcing agreement, we want to make sure that we are receiving value for what we actually are paying for. This must provide management of our organization with assurance of compliance by that outside vendor with the service level agreements we have in place. In order to do this, we want to make sure that the terms and conditions in the outsource agreement are being met. We also want to ensure that anytime there are laws or regulations, say for example privacy laws and laws dealing with the handling of information such as transport or data flow and so on, have also been addressed, and that the vendor we are working with is actually meeting and compliant with those laws and regulations. As an auditor, it's our job to be the eyes and ears of management. We provide assessment of whether or not the benefits that were promised in this outsourced relationship are actually being realized. In many cases, we may find that the promised benefits as far as cost savings, efficiencies, maybe haven't really been what should have been delivered according to the original promises and agreement. So therefore, as auditors, we will weigh and evaluate that outsourced agreement to make sure that everything is being done to ensure then the maximum benefit is being received and that the terms of the agreement are being met. Quite often, if we're dealing with, say, for example, an outsourced organization such as a cloud provider, it is going to be very difficult for us to do any type of an audit of their systems and processes. We'll not be able to have the access, for example, to that cloud provider's systems and networks to be able to ensure that they really are protecting our data. We won't be able to check their hiring practices or the vetting of their employees to ensure that their employees only have the correct levels of access. So this makes us a little bit blind. As an auditor, we need to provide management of our organization with assurance that we have a relationship in which we do not have an extraordinary liability. As an organization that receives confidential information, such as personally identifiable information or personal health information, we remain the owner of that information even if we outsource the storage and processing of that to a third party. This presents a liability to us because if that third party has a breach, it is still our organization that is very often liable, both financially and reputationally, for that breach and the impact of that breach. So we need to provide some way of gaining insight into that third-party provider, especially, for example, a cloud provider. Now, the way this is often done is that the third-party service provider will provide us a report then that has been generated by their auditors, by a third party. And their auditors, the auditors of the cloud provider, will be able to demonstrate through this report that the cloud provider is compliant with best practices and standards. Now, these types of reports used to be called SAS 70s. Today, we quite often will use a Statement on Standards for Attestation number 16. There are three types. There is the SOC 1, which is an audit of financial statements. There is a SOC 2. A SOC 2 is an audit of the suitability of controls. A SOC 2 report is quite a detailed and usually internal report that an organization will have received from their auditors that tells them whether or not their internal controls are adequate. Now, the measurement of these controls can be done in either one of two ways. A Type 1 report is when then the audit was done at a point in time. And so then the SSAE 16 SOC 2 report will say, at this point in time, when their controls were audited, they were adequate or they were compliant with those controls. We also, though, have a Type 2 report. A Type 2 report means that the assessment of those controls was done over a period of time, so that the company conducting the third-party audit may have done this over 30 days, 60 days, in many cases up to 6 months. So this means that not only were they compliant at one point in time, but that the audit organization has a level of assurance that they are maintaining compliance with adequate controls over an extended period of time. There is also a SOC 3 report. The SOC 3 report is the one that is usually used for external distribution. So if I have a relationship with a cloud provider, that cloud provider will normally provide me then with a SOC 3 report. That is a little bit more of a summary report. It does not go into the detail of a SOC 2. Now, we do find in some cases that a third-party provider will actually give us a SOC 2 report. That provides us a high level of assurance and in-depth insight into that organization's controls and infrastructure. However, the normal is that we would actually get a SOC 3, the more high-level generic type of report that does not detail any specific deficiencies or characteristics of the organization's, the service provider firm's infrastructure. A SOC 3 report is always done as a Type 1 at a point in time. There are other types of audits that can be provided for us as well. We, of course, saw then a report called the ISAE 3402. It is the other alternative then to the SSAE 16. Both of these reports were then the replacement for what was originally known as the SAS 70 report. The SSAE 16 is more or less related to the work of the American Certified Professional Accountants Organization, Institute of Certified Professional Accountants. So therefore it has a little bit more of a bias from one region of the world, whereas the ISAE 3402 report is known as the International Standard on Assurance Engagements.